Okay, my friend. So I have a special guest here for you because we're talking about trying to get perspective. Like I talked to Georgie from Ukraine Matters about the European perspective. Talked to Konstantin inside Russia, trying to get that perspective. Talked to a professor from within Ukraine the other day, trying to get that perspective. So I have a special guest, and to me, he's a much more special guest. This is my cousin, who is a career diplomat. His name is Dr. Frank Jenista. Spent 25 years as an American Foreign Service officer. He had served in Japan, Indonesia, New Zealand, South America. So my question for him was all about like how is the rest of the world processing what we're doing? Like how is that like what's going on? The ripple effects that we're sending around the world diplomatically have to be something very different. So Frank, welcome. And what's happening? How are they experiencing what we're sending out?
Well, first, Darren, let me express appreciation for joining you on Professor Gerdes Explains. And I hope I'll have an opportunity to offer some perspectives that might explain things a bit more for your viewers. I think a great part of the world, especially our allies, are seriously worried
Hmm.
about what they've seen come out of Washington in the last 6 weeks.
Hmm.
They have heard the United States offer concession after concession after concession to Russia, precisely the things that Russia wants to hear. For example, uh, no, it'd be okay if there's no NATO membership for Ukraine.
Hmm.
And no, there being no American boots on the ground. Um, and then conducting direct ties or discussions about ties with Russia when the rest of the Ukraine support group of over 50 nations has refused to have any direct dealings with Putin, especially since he's an indicted war criminal.
Hmm.
So you take those as initial steps. Then you look at the nature of the confrontation that happened in the Oval Office,
Hmm. Yeah.
followed by a halt of military aid to Ukraine, a halt of intelligence sharing, and a halt in satellite information. And you have to wonder if you have assumed that for, especially for the Europeans, you've assumed for 80 years that
Yeah.
you and the United States are absolutely tight. And now
Right.
you hear talks like, Ukraine, that's in Europe, that's a European problem.
So let me ask something because you brought this up where you were talking about how they're experiencing this and Putin is a war criminal, indicted war criminal. So why are we talking? Radcliffe just opened communications with his counterpart. I'm of two minds of that. Part of me says no, don't do that, but part of me says, hey, during the Cold War, we had certainly some pretty bad folks, Stalin's regime and whatever, and we were still in communication. So. I'm not sure that it's bad as long as you're holding your ground and your position and while you're holding that. And I think that's the trick here is that we're not like a Tulsi Gabbard is not a reliable kind of person to be in that particular position. So now opening that communication with coupled with the posture of the Trump administration seems to be, I guess that's extra frightening. Is that fair, or how do you process this? Maybe
No,
I'm
I
off.
think that's exactly right, Darren. The question is, what is the confidence level? What's the trust level?
Hmm.
Um George Shultz, one of the most brilliant of our secretaries of state, said that trust is the coin of the realm.
Yep, that's
Well,
exactly.
Russia's record does not give us a any level of confidence at all.
Hmm.
But our leaders are expressing a degree of confidence that objective history says maybe shouldn't be there. I'm not hearing trust but verify.
Yeah, yeah, right. Yeah,
So,
there's a I have a great relationship with him as if that is everything.
right, and I'm afraid that it is. That I'd like to get a peace deal signed here because I'll look really good if I can get it. And I don't really care about the terms of the peace deal. I just want to have a peace deal so I can check the block on that. And then I can get on with good, friendly relations with my friend Vladimir.
So
And
do you
that
think what's
opens the possibility for all kinds of games playing by an ex KGB guy who I'm sure has done full psychological workup on Donald Trump, knows exactly how to make him pliable.
do you think the end goal then is to have other business deals on the other side with Russia and normalize relations, push the metaphorical reset button, and move on? Is that what's motivating this more than anything else, or is it Nobel Prize prospect hopes, or how do you perceive this?
I go with both of those. If you can get a peace deal and you can say, I got it, nobody else had a prayer of getting it, I'm the only one who could have gotten it. Um, I have serious doubts that given the way he's treated his NATO allies, that the Nobel Committee would be eager to put his name forward for a peace prize. Secondly, the Russians are not going to uh, end the war at this stage just because Donald Trump wants a peace deal. My thoughts on the ceasefire. I think that Russia not wanting to get crosswise with Trump and say no, no ceasefire. They're going to say something along the lines of yes, but.
Yeah, yeah. Hmm.
And the but will be, but Ukraine can't have any more military aid during the ceasefire. And I'm going along with you on this, and I'm trying to help you here, but I really can't do it for free. So maybe you should loosen up some of those sanctions as a step of good faith. There will be some clause there, and then if they get approval, uh, Ukraine will bail, making Russia look good. And if Ukraine still decides to take a chance, then Putin has got the ball in his court and in control of the ball.
So who's in the harder place, Ukraine or Russia? Because it looks like Ukraine is. I'm fairly optimistic. I mean, it looks like Ukraine got something pretty significant yesterday by putting it onto Russia,
Yes.
being the like, okay, now you've got to step up, and if Russia doesn't do it, then Trump has to turn the screws on Russia. But Trump's turning the screws look like pretty mediocre. What he came out and said today was, well, if they don't, we might have to think about some sanctions or something. Like that was today. I'm like, oh, come on, sanctions. Like you're going to take away Ukrainian uh, arms and intelligence, but you're going to maybe sanction Russia. So who's
Yeah. I
in better
mean,
shape?
the dice are very clearly loaded.
Hmm.
And if Russia came back and just said no, then it would be really interesting because then you'd have the two alpha males
Hmm.
having to work it out. Putin is smarter than that. That's why he's going to come back with yes, but,
Okay.
and throw some smoke and mirrors and other things so that it's precisely because he does not want it to be yes or no.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
Yeah.
wants to
I
be seen to be cooperative, but there are these things that we really need to deal with. And I couldn't really go all in, if I think the Ukrainians are just going to spend all this time rearming, which of course he will do, of course, himself if
Sure,
he ever
absolutely.
agreed. But I think the goal is to just keep talking, keep kicking the can down the road. He thinks he's winning. Uh, you can make an argument that he's not, but he is gradually pulling back small amounts of territory, getting pretty much all of the Ukrainians today apparently out of Kursk Oblats. Um, so he can spin this to his people and to the rest of the world as Russia winning, and I'm sure he will.
So let's say they did get a peace deal. Let's hypothetically say the Ukrainians are going to spend the next 30 days digging, and they're going to be very tired in 30 days, right? I mean, I mean, they're going to be digging trench lines and fortifying and that sort of thing. Well, what do the Russians do? They rotate people in and out, or um, I
Bring
mean,
more
just
people in.
running arms to the front, or what?
Well, yes. The Ukrainians have used HIMARS rocket artillery and longer range drones very effectively against Russian logistics.
Hmm.
And they've gone after the tanker trucks and the cargo trucks. So that, for example, if you have your uh, stockpile of food, water, ammunition, all the necessities for the guys on the front line, say 10 miles behind the front line, you can make a bunch of trips every day up to the front line.
Hmm.
If the Ukrainians are successfully forcing you back to 20, 30, 50 miles, especially for your larger ammo dumps, guess how many trips your trucks are going to make every day? The
Yeah.
Ukrainians have successfully done that. Well, the Russians, if there's a ceasefire, can quickly move all of this support up immediately behind the front line, try to get those lines restocked and ready to go for when the ceasefire inevitably ceases.
So I just had an aha as you were talking because I track the the numbers of every day I'll track the casualties and the number of vehicles and equipment and things and it kind of looks silly like the number of vehicles were like a truck like well that's not that important. Well actually it is really important if if the drones are able to take these out to prevent it from being able to do that. So thank you for mentioning that because that just clicked something in my head. So if we do this, if we theoretically do this 30-day ceasefire, then uh, at some point when it breaks, it's going to be far worse than what it was before. I mean, we'll probably see like casualties of like December and January kind of level casualties because they're going to be right at each other and really armed. Does that sound
Exactly.
okay?
Yeah.
Huh. Okay, but I don't think Putin wants to go there, and I think, like as you were saying, that he's going to find a way not to do that. My read is that he's trying to say, I don't want to do a ceasefire. I want to do an actual agreement, like an actual long-term agreement. But then he's going to find a way not to do that.
Right. Just today, there was a report of a strategy paper done by a Russian think tank that supposedly has close connections to the Kremlin, which just reinforces everything we've heard before. The goal is not territory. The
Mhm.
goal is the elimination of Ukraine as an independent entity and as a people, as a culture. This is genocide, which the Russians have been trying to do for 400 years against the Ukrainians. I have a copy of a decree by Peter the Great, 1721, banning the use of the Ukrainian language. And every
Hmm.
czar, every Soviet leader since then has tried to get rid of these stubborn Ukrainians by claiming they're just Russians. Stalin, you may recall, 30 to 33 starved 3 to 4 million Ukrainians to
Sure.
death deliberately because they weren't being very cooperative. And every time that the pressure eases on the Ukrainians over these 400 years, they have headed for the exits. A couple of things that might be of interest in that area to your viewers is that Ukraine declared independence in 1918,
Hmm.
right at the end of World War I, when the Russian army collapsed and Russia went into civil war. And the Germans actually guaranteed Ukraine's independence until they lost and then they left.
Hmm.
Well, the Ukrainians kept fighting for several more years against the Russians to try to preserve their independence.
Sure.
Finally, in 1922, they were forced into becoming the Ukraine Soviet Socialist Republic and were promised, oh, yeah, yeah, you can have your culture, you can have your language. And then Stalin decided in 29, no, you can't, and you're going to become Russians. And when they refused, you had the death by starvation.
Hmm.
And same thing happened in World War II. A Ukrainian independence army fought both the Soviets and the Germans. And they fought till 1949, which is 4 years after the end of World War II.
Hmm.
So that gives you some idea. Ukrainians know that the Russians have been trying to erase them uh, from the planet for 400 years. And they're going to take that into account. So they're not going to surrender.
It seems kind of odd to me that they're talking about how we have to protect these Russian speakers, but the people that are most in harm's way and most abused are those that Russia has captured in those four oblasts that are just, I mean, the crimes that leak out from those oblasts are against mostly the highest concentration of Russian speakers. I mean, it seems like that's just an excuse, just like
It
neo
was.
Nazis is just an
It was just
excuse.
strictly an excuse. And more to my point about genocide, not only do they have this 400-year history, they are watching it take place in every occupied part of Ukraine. Uh, recent study called The Occupied Areas a Totalitarian Hell. Random arrests,
Mhm,
torture, rapes. There's nothing you can do against the Russian soldiers. You are arrested for speaking Ukrainian. You
mhm,
have to get a Russian passport to get any kind of services. If you want your pension to be paid, Russian passport. You want to send your kids to school, Russian passport. If you want to get any medical assistance, Russian passport. Uh, all of the museums in Russian control have been looted, and
mm.
and all of the artifacts sent back to Russia to be relabeled as Russian.
So it seems like, and I was talking to a German professor not too long ago who was saying that we're going to see something very similar to like an East Germany or like after World War II, like what the Russians did to occupied areas when this veil lifts, assuming that it does lift, and the Russians have to move out. And this is one of the reasons why perhaps Putin is not interested in any kind of peace deal because if you move out and then you find this is pretty bad.
Well,
That
but we already know all about it. It just hasn't gotten into a lot of the thinking, the knowledge of people in the West. You know, we keep talking about the ceasefire and negotiations as if it's about land.
Yeah.
Oh, just draw a border, just draw a border, and that's the end of it. No, it's not. For example, Russia wants all of the four recently captured oblasts
Mhm.
in full. They don't control any of them except Luhansk. So what you would be doing if Ukraine agreed to that, they would be putting 1 million more Ukrainians into the totalitarian hell. They
Yeah.
cannot do that.
Let me circle back to toward the original question. How is Europe processing, in your estimation, what we saw yesterday with the ceasefire, and then the bigger question was dealing with us. dealing with the United States. And then I want to expand the lens even more. Like you were in Japan, for example. How is Japan, for example, experiencing us when they're thinking about what's going to happen here with China and Taiwan, and what will be Japan and South Korea and Australia's role, or is the U.S. going to stand by us if they're not standing by Ukraine? I know that's a lot to ask, but let's first look at what we're thinking European, and then what we're thinking worldwide.
The Europeans are, on the positive side, been totally refocused.
Hmm.
We just had a major meeting of defense chiefs of the 30 Coalition of the Willing to try to decide how do we support Ukraine if the United States bails out completely.
Hmm.
Can we trust the United States for any measure of support? And watching the way that they pressured, bullied, some would say,
Hmm.
Ukraine into talks toward the ceasefire, what if Europe decides to do something and the United States disagrees with it? Will they not only leave Europe to us, will they pressure us, which they can?
Hmm.
And this gets back to the fact that Europe is almost exclusively supplied at its highest end with US weapons. All of
And
these top line weapons, from F 35 fighters to HIMARS to ATACMS missiles, require regular software upgrades.
mm,
Your F 35, I think Europe has ordered something like over 500 of them. But if a leader of the United States should tell his Secretary of Defense, stop sending software upgrades and or spare parts, pretty soon that multi-billion dollar aircraft is just a lump sitting on the ground.
wow.
I mean, that's how serious it is. That's why Schultz, trust is the coin of the realm. If, and we know that Europeans are already talking about the dangers they put themselves in now that they have encountered a situation which until 6 weeks ago was unthinkable, that the United States would
Yeah.
not be there for them, that the United States would always be their backstop.
Have you ever seen anything like this in your 25 years of public service? I mean, that's
No,
this just I'm
absolutely
scratching my
not.
head. How did this happen?
Uh, just look back at the vote in the United Nations
Hmm.
General Assembly to on the third anniversary of the war to essentially do what they did on year at the outbreak of the war at year one and year two, and to pass a simple resolution condemning Russia for the for aggression against a fellow member of the United Nations. And the United States refused to vote for it because it condemned Russian aggression. They had voted for it, the US had voted for it for 3 times. This
Yeah.
was not something new. All of our European allies were voting for it. It passed 93 to 18. The United States voted with Russia, Belarus. The only European to vote for it was Hungary. In Latin America, Nicaragua and Haiti voted for it. Nobody else was on our side. And
Mm.
8 small African autocracies voted for it. This, I'm sure, is the first time since the founding of the United Nations in 1945 that the United States voted against Western Europe on an issue of critical importance to Western Europe's
Right.
security. I the stunned would be the best
Yeah.
description.
Yeah, this is it's just it's unbelievable. Like it's like so as an analog, I was reading an economics book and they were unhappy about the idea of using throwing our weight around with the monetary policies that we have. Like we're going to seize certain assets. Now we hear all this about seizing Russian assets, and it's a bad idea. Now this was before anything happened with Ukraine. But when we did this, when Carter froze assets, or when during the Reagan administration we did the same kind of thing, it really sent significant tremors into the world's way of like, wait, you can do that, and and so that's a danger to the U.S. as the reserve currency, and so I don't like the idea of seizing the Russian assets outright like that. Okay, so you're using the interest on the loan. Okay, I understand, but you're doing that. But I think this is kind of that same kind of shockwave, but diplomatically rather than with the monetary supply. It's just something that we never have expected would ever happen. That's happening, and we're like trying to process it and wondering how did we get here. So yeah,
On
um,
the frozen Russian assets, we have a precedent, a recent one. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, Iraqi funds internationally were frozen.
mhm,
When Iraq was kicked out of Kuwait, those frozen assets were transferred to Kuwait as reparations.
mhm.
So there's precedence.
And so that might actually happen on the backside theoretically, but to use it immediately seems like a troublesome possibility that again when it was first done, I think it was the Carter administration where it was first done, it really kind of flipped things out. um I'm trying to I can't even remember what it was, but here diplomatically we're like I just don't understand how we even got here where we're coming down on the side of Russia as if Russia's the good guys, and, and historically, this has not been the case, generally speaking. Like even in World War II, we kind of knew, like, yeah, they're not really the good guys, but at least they're helping us fight Hitler. So, and then afterwards, it was much clearer. So, like, how did we get here to begin with? And then let's go circle back to the other questions about how others are experiencing us.
Yeah, well, there's just been a sea change on the part of the individual uh, who's the president of the United States right now. Uh, he doesn't care about precedent, allies, treaties, history. That's not important. Um, what do I want to get done? How do we transact business to get it done? Now, an area that he's not going to be happy about is watching U.S. defense manufacturers rapidly lose their position as number one on the world stage.
Yep.
Right now, we are providing about 43% of the weapons sold around the world.
Hmm.
And we have people lining up. They've seen how our HIMARS have been performing, they've seen how our Patriots have been performing in Ukraine. And we have earned far more in contracts for these weapons than we've ever given to Ukraine in support. People don't think about that part of it. Uh, Basically, Ukraine has been an advertising program
Yeah.
for US weapon sales, and we are far ahead on the game. Now, all of a sudden, the brakes are being slammed by the Europeans. The stocks of Rheinmetall and British BAE and
Hmm.
French Rafale are going through the roof, and our Lockheed Martins and others are falling because there's been a fundamental break in the confidence of the Europeans in the dependability of the United States. And then
Right.
this transfers quickly over to South Korea and Japan and the Philippines. Can we depend on the United States? Have we gone from being an ally to a business partner
Hmm.
who doesn't
Yeah, that's a real
care
good way of
about
saying
what
that.
happens to us as long as money is made?
Yeah, that's a powerful analogy, or what you just said was that shift in the relationship from ally to business partner is does seem to be how Trump thinks, and that's worth hearing, like the whole video here. Like that's profound as a difference. And when you're not useful, you're not useful. And so that's a very different thing than being a trusted ally.
Yeah, I mean, take Vance's quote, "I don't care very much about Ukraine one way or the other." That
Mm.
kind of encapsulates the approach. Make it worth my while, give me an opportunity to maybe dig up some rare earth metals and others as well. Hey, we can do business, but I'm not going to provide any support for your for any ceasefire. We're not going to put any troops on the ground. Um, my buddy Putin won't attack because we'll have American companies in there, and he knows bad things would happen if he attacked American companies. That's about the level of confidence that you could expect from that.
So you were in the foreign service in Japan. Let's just think about Japan. Trump was talking about Japan's kind of freeloading on us, and what would they do for us if we, they're not doing anything. Well, first we made them uh, intentionally peaceful, so we wouldn't have a repeat of World War II. So we kind of disarmed after World War II and made them not be like that. And then they've been a staunch ally for the last however many years. How are they processing what they're seeing here with Trump in light of what could kick off with? First, do you think that something could kick off with China? And if so, in light of that?
Who knows when Xi Jinping will attempt to bring Taiwan back into the fold of China? That's kind of unpredictable, but the
Hmm.
Chinese are watching this very carefully. They're watching the Russians have a go at separating the U.S. from its longtime 80-year NATO allies. They're watching the hesitancy to support Ukraine. They're watching the disagreements within the Europeans. And as this unravels, China, I'm sure, is getting more and more confident that if something should go up, A, will the United States come to the aid of Taiwan? And B, given the way the United States is treating its European allies, will the Europeans lift a finger to help in any way they might be able to if she goes for Taiwan?
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about separating Russia separating the U.S. from Europe, but it seems like what Trump might be doing, let's try to put a best face on it, is trying to separate Russia from China because he perceives China to be a bigger threat. And by being kind to Russia, even at the Ukrainians' expense, maybe that's what he's trying to do. Is there any
This
validity to
could
that?
be one of the most naive ideas that Trump has.
Okay. So look,
Russia,
I've heard that floated. I don't see it happening, but that's what I've heard. And okay, so maybe he's
no,
thinking,
Russia knows they cannot get crosswise with China.
yeah.
You have 1.3 billion versus 140 million Russians. You have Chinese grievances over unfair treaties all over the eastern part of what is now Russia. You have the Chinese entrepreneurs de facto taking over the retail economy of
Mhm,
eastern Russia, marrying Russians so that they can buy property, run businesses, etc. The czars were worried about the yellow peril 400 years ago. So the worst thing in the world that Putin could do would be to come up with some cockamamie alliance with the United States against China.
so there's no possible way that he could split that off, and really, China's the big brother now, which it used to not be.
They are the big brother.
Yeah,
Uh, Russia is in all areas subordinate to China right now.
that's really interesting. Yeah, I don't I think the rest of the world doesn't necessarily think of I mean, until they consider it. They don't think about it like that. I mean, you have to update the files. How Soviet Union was this big thing, and China was that, and Nixon splitting off. I think this reverse Nixon kind of idea
Yeah,
is kind of what's
it's
in Trump's
nuts.
head, perhaps. And it's yeah, wow. Okay, so with
So
that, go ahead.
as the uncertainty grows about the United States among its allies, I'm thinking particularly of Germany,
Hmm.
of South Korea, and of Japan. Germany has started talking nuclear.
Yeah.
For the first time, it's been broached in a way that is being discussed, not immediately tossed aside. With the aid that North Korea is getting from Russia to improve their missiles, to perhaps build a nuclear submarine, to learn how to fight modern battles, uh, that puts pressure on South Korea. When they were sort of an incompetent nuclear power, that was one thing. If they become competent conventionally, uh, South Korea could decide very easily, our nuclear umbrella that the United States has for us is looking pretty leaky.
Hmm.
We can't depend on that nuclear umbrella to actually be deployed if North Korea attacks. We have all the nuclear technology we need. We have multiple nuclear power plants. If we make the decision, just like Japan, we can be nuclear in about 45 minutes. Japan, the same thing. They've got all the plutonium they need just sitting there, and if they decide, it's just a political decision. The minute those two countries decide they want to be a nuclear power, they will be in short order.
So let's talk about this. Let's chase that down. So we've created instability in Europe. We've created instability in the Asian NATO, if I could call it that, like those
Yeah.
countries that are. Is that a fair kind of way of looking at those few countries?
Well, it's bilateral because Japan and South Korea are still not ready to have a mutual defense pact
Well, no,
between them.
what I mean is like the countries that are still aligned with the West, Japan, Korea, Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, that kind of something. We're isolating them, right? I mean, we're
Yes.
certainly our policies have been antagonistic to all the wrong people for all the wrong reasons. It's just so bizarre.
Yeah, we're antagonizing our allies and making nice with Russia.
And it seems like it's all for Russia. Like we're antagonizing all of our allies and only for Russia.
Exactly.
I- Okay, so I don't understand what's driving that as well. Maybe I mean this is a big question too, but like what is it about MAGA, about the American first? Because I'm okay with the not MAGA, but I'm okay with the concept of America first, that America should be primary, but we should follow our interests. But our interests have been where all these other countries are, keeping our friends and keeping our enemies worried about us and our friends. So I would define it very differently than what MAGA has done, and I just don't understand the thinking here. That's thinking that this is good, like yay, see what Trump is doing. Let's take Greenland or tick off Canada. I don't get it.
I think you have an issue, and you see it on the economic side as well, where we're seeing the stock market tank and trade wars get launched. Once you have an emotional commitment to a position, or in this case, a person, it's very, very difficult to say, I was misled or worse.
No, you're right.
And so you then have to come up with excuses, so that you can justify in your own mind why you've always been right and how it's not possible that your great leader And you, as a follower, have been wrong.
Yeah, and that's why every politician wants you to just give a dollar, because once you give a dollar, you have an emotional commitment that you didn't have before, and now you're many times more likely to think that your candidate has the greater potential to win. I mean, it's bizarre, but that's the psychology behind it. So you just magnify that for everything else that we're doing. But like
I
I'm
think
looking around. Go ahead.
I think for MAGA, this is more like you've signed the mortgage on your house over to Trump.
Mm,
That's not a dollar.
yeah.
It's much more. It's much deeper. It's more visceral, and it's practically immune to correction.
So I can't understand how we're here. Uh, I, I'm a Reagan conservative still. I know where you are in the same kind of camp, and I'm scratching my head looking at this, going how like since when were the Russians the good guys? Since when do we think that it's a great idea to have tariffs? Now, I'm a free marketeer still. I mean it's like everything's got turned upside down, and yeah, I'm having a
The
hard time processing.
the answer is the most effective Russian influence operation since the Cold War.
Okay.
If your uh, viewers think back to Russia's invasion 3 years ago, there was no doubt among the American public who were the good guys and who were the bad guys. Here we have the noble Ukrainians already invaded once in 2014. Now the Russians are coming for them again. All kinds of barbarities and cruelties and mass rapes, executions, etc. In the United Nations, similarly clear 144 to 5 to condemn this act of aggression. Then in in the spring of 2000, and then when Zelensky spoke twice to joint sessions of Congress, everybody's on side of Ukraine and Zelensky, standing ovations every time. And then you think about how did we get where we are now? And this was a Russian influence operation, a European intelligence service discovered an order in the spring of 2023. So, year and a half, well, getting close to 2 years now, telling all of its resources, whether it's the SVR, which is the new KGB, or whether it's military intelligence, or it's just influencers on uh, Russia Today and similar outlets. We want you to go out there and undermine Ukraine, undermine Zelensky, try to cause divisions, encourage the radicals on both right and left as a way of stressing the US political system. You may recall that, last fall, there's a US government agency called FARA, which is a Foreign Agents Registration Act. They discovered that the Russians had paid $10 million to some small conservative media organizations to distribute payments of from hundreds to thousands of dollars a month to influencers who would spread the Russian message. And the number one target, here's how your listeners can test for this. What are these people saying about Zelensky? Now, to the rest of the world, Zelensky is the same guy that we were giving standing ovations to 2 years ago. He is seen as the Churchill of the 21st century. He's greeted warmly with praise every international visit he makes. Whereas here, you'll get people saying, well, he's a money launderer, he's a crook, his wife spends $1 million in Paris, he has villas, he has yachts. All of this is totally made up. And when I uh, get into conversations with people who have bought into some of this, I say, who knows Zelensky better than anybody else? That would be the people of Ukraine. What is his approval rating by the people that he is leading? Well, 2 weeks ago it was 57. Now it's up to 65 because of the Oval Office attacks. Nevertheless, any Western leader would kill to have those approval ratings. Who knows him second best? All of his European neighbors and their intelligence services. If there was any truth to the idea that he was ripping off American money or that he was selling weapons to the Mexican cartels or buying yachts, buying villas, his wife is buying out all the Gucci stores in Paris, they would know this and they would not be honoring him as they do today. He has He's always on the front line with his troops. He had a very funny interview with Brett Baer on Fox News, so close to the front lines that they could hear artillery going off, and Brett Baer is jumping a little every time one of these explosions goes off somewhere close by. He has spoken given video messages to the Ukrainians every single night for the last, what is it, 1,170 some days or whatever it is. I was curious. So, we always talk about FDR and his fireside chats during the Depression and during the war to get everybody united and build up their confidence. I was curious, how many of these did he actually do? 31.
So, it's funny because we just passed 1,111 days, like a day or two ago. It's something like that. You said 1,070. I mean, it's somewhere, but that's wow. We think of fireside chats with there was only 30 of them. We think of it like we almost revere it. And I've thought a lot about this. Reagan was a great communicator. And like he was really great at like clearly expressing what we were trying to express. And Zelensky, I think it's a cut out of that same cloth. Like people denigrate him. Oh, he's just a comedian, or he was just an actor, or something along those lines. No, he's exactly the right guy that we needed for this hour for Ukraine, in my estimation.
Oh, I completely agree. I mean, he has this very unusual background. He's a he's a lawyer,
Hmm.
but also became famous as a comedian, as a star on a video series. He won Ukraine's Dancing with the Stars,
Hmm.
um, and so kind of got into office by mistake or by happenstance. He played a high school teacher who complained about corruption. His students videoed this supposedly off the record conversation. It went viral, and the high school teacher becomes president. And he became so famous playing that role that he actually did get elected
Yeah.
as president on an anti-corruption platform. Um, and so when the Russians invade, nobody's expecting very much of him.
Hmm. I
And
see.
he has this transformation on day one where there's this
Yeah.
video. Um, First of all, the CIA knows that the Russians have hit squads out for him and his family and all of the other top levels of Ukraine. Something that they may not know is that the Russians were bringing with them 42,000 body bags
Hmm.
to take care of the top level of the intelligentsia, political system, everything in Ukraine, just as Russians have been doing for 400 years. So the CIA says we can get you and your family out, and he gives the iconic response, title of your book.
Yeah.
I need ammunition, not a ride. He goes on television because the rumors were that he had fled the city and says, "I'm here. The prime minister is here. The political leader is here. Everybody's here. Uh, we're going to fight. Guys 18 to 60, you're in. We've got plenty of rifles. Grab a white rifle, organize yourselves, etc." And it just went from there. And he transformed between in front of our eyes from this kind of interesting character as a president to Churchill.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Short of World War II, I can't think. Can you think of any other figure that was like we didn't have a great time with Zim in Vietnam, and like you look at Karzai in Afghanistan, that was a train wreck, or Iraq. I can't think of any other world leader that was quite like that.
No, I completely agree.
So yeah, so he was the right guy at the right hour. There's these weird parallels between him and Reagan, like Reagan having been in the B movies and then GE theater and having had that background. There's also a weird connection between him and Trump. Like if it wasn't for The Apprentice, I wonder if Trump would have actually come to power.
Now that's really interesting. Probably not. And if it hadn't been for this TV show where he's playing an accidental president, then he becomes a president. Yeah.
So I want to circle back to the last point, just to kind of wrap up. So we know that Trump has sowed a great deal of uncertainty into the environment. It's kind of like when the chairman of the Fed says, "I'm feeling bad today," just because he or she has a cold, and then the markets go crazy. Trump's been doing that. I think he's been doing some things deliberately. I can't figure out exactly why, but he's been doing that. But how do we get back to like normalcy? Or can we, as long as Trump is being like, well, like Trump is?
If you watch the first 20 minutes of the Oval Office meeting, everything was perfectly normal.
Hmm.
And then Trump and then Vance uh, kicked it off, getting personal, shouting over each other, etc. But if you saw the press conference after the agreement in Jeddah on the ceasefire, everything that Waltz and Rubio said was very standard.
Hmm.
Supportive of Ukraine, was recognizing the need for Ukraine's independence and sovereignty
Hmm.
and security assurances.
Hmm.
Not saying the US would do it, but that was a very normal press conference. So I have to hope that there are within the uh, Trump administration uh, people with experience who will be able to deal with some of the improvisation, shall we say, that they see coming from their leader. Now, the problem is that I think there's a certain amount of autocrat envy here on the part of Trump.
Uh-huh.
He loves the fact that, can you believe I mean, he runs 1.4 billion people. And his long term affinity for Putin, he has never in in Trump 45 or Trump 47 said a single negative thing about Vladimir Putin. He'll
Huh. That's
call
interesting.
Zelenskyy a dictator, but he has never ever admitted to using that title or even being even approving the use of that title toward Vladimir Putin.
So it's always fascinating when you see something like that. I was at an academic conference about 5 years ago. My colleague and I, my co-author and I are doing our presentation, and afterwards, the guy that was moderating our our paper was talking like in glowing terms about uh, it's kind of like what I remember about what the Chinese were able to do. I mean, they were able to build this bridge over like in a matter of weeks, almost months, and get it done and just get it done. Like they didn't have to worry about all these other things getting in the way. Like that's called democracy, right? Like they didn't have to worry about like they could just make the like and the guy was a provost from a high a well-known named university that if I said it, and I'm not going to say what school it was, but like I would never want to work for that particular provost. Like the way that he thought about what leadership is just like basically you do what I say and get it done. And like that's it was scary, but that's kind of like what you see coming from the Trump not just Trump, but others within his administration seem to have that kind of view of things rather than and let me back up. MAGA writ large seems to have this kind of view where it's just adversarial. You've got to punch the Democrats in the nose, even if you could have make a deal with them. Like there's just something different in the temperament, and I'm not sure until we get past this the temperament of the person who's now occupying the Oval Office that will ever fix things. But maybe we will. I just don't know.
Well, I'm very concerned about that. Actually, on both the far right and the far left.
Hmm.
As long as what is happening is an action that they approve of, they're very willing to forget about the niceties of law and democracy.
Hmm.
And then they will jump on the other party for violating rule of law and failing to commit to democracy until they get into a position of power, and then things just flip.
Yep.
I've been amused with this talk about doing away with the filibuster, for example. And Schumer has flipped 180 degrees 5 different times,
Yep.
depending, of course, on whether he would be the one making the call
Yeah.
or whether he would be the one on the defensive.
Yeah, it just seems bizarre the way that Washington's always been fundamentally broken, but it was designed to be fundamentally broken. I did my dissertation on the founding fathers and their understanding of leadership as they were creating the document, and we complained about gridlock. Gridlock is good. This is the way that the system's supposed to work. You're not supposed to pass things really quickly. You're supposed to be like have to work through this and negotiate and work through those things. So anyway, I don't know when we're going to see normal again. And but we're pretty much at our time or about out of time. And Frank, I really appreciate your insights. I hope this will be useful to people that are listening to this now. And thank you for being willing to share those with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure to be a rookie on Professor Gerdes Explains. I really enjoyed
A rookie with 25 years of foreign service experience and then
it.
teaching and retiring as a professor emeritus. I don't I'd hardly qualify that as rookie.
Well, a podcast rookie.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime you have any great ahas that you want to share with the world. And anybody who's listening to this is all in. The only reason that they're listening to this is because they're all in behind Ukraine. So if you just ever get an itch that you want to share something, you know where to go.
Okay.
All
I'll
right.
look forward to it. Thank you, Darren.
Thank you.